You could not live with your own failure. Where did that bring you? Back to me.
The Russo brothers just discovered that identity is conditional. Inside the MCU, they were visionaries. Outside the MCU, they were tourists in their own profession. How do you go from Avengers Endgame to a Netflix flop no one talks about? Buckle up as we solve this mystery, because their failures outside the MCU and their triumphs within it aren't accidents. It's about the terrifying realization that who you are depends entirely on where you are. Let's start with something that sounds like a joke, but isn't. Before the Russos became household names, they were TV comedy directors. They worked on Arrested Development, that brilliant show about a dysfunctional family that got canceled and then became a Netflix cult classic. They even won an Emmy for it. But the real magic happened on Community. Remember Community, the show about a study group at a community college that somehow became one of the most creative shows on television? The Russos directed these insane paintball episodes where the entire campus turned into a Western gunfight, then an action movie parody. Students were diving behind desks, military-style tactics were deployed, and somehow it all worked. The episodes were funny, visually stunning, and managed to juggle like 12 different characters all at once. Kevin Feige binged those Community episodes and practically jumped out of his seat. Think about that for a second. The future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe was decided by watching Joel McHale pretend to shoot paintballs. And here's what's crazy, it worked perfectly. When the Russos got the call to direct Captain America: The Winter Soldier, they weren't being asked to reinvent the wheel. They were being asked to make it spin faster. Marvel had already built the machine. Robert Downey Jr. was already Tony Stark. Chris Evans was already Captain America. The characters existed, the world was established, and Kevin Feige was the conductor making sure everything stayed on track. All the Russos had to do was what they'd always been good at: take existing elements and make them absolutely electric. And boy, did they deliver. The Winter Soldier wasn't just another superhero movie. It was a 1970s paranoid thriller disguised as a superhero movie. Think 3 Days of the Condor, but with a guy who throws a shield that defies physics. Remember that elevator fight scene? The one where Cap was trapped in an elevator with like 8 Hydra agents, and you could feel the tension building? That wasn't just action, that was psychological warfare. You knew something was coming, but when it hit like a freight train. Or the highway chase scene with the Winter Soldier. Practical effects, real stunts, and that moment where you realize Bucky was the assassin? Chef's kiss. The Russos had found their superpower. They were system maximizers. Give them established characters, a clear framework, and unlimited resources, and they could create moments that would live in pop culture forever. Let's break down exactly how good they were at this. Captain America: Civil War wasn't just a superhero movie. It was a divorce drama with superpowers. The Russos took the fundamental question, what happens when friends become enemies over principle, and scaled it to world-ending proportions. The airport battle wasn't just spectacular, it was heartbreaking because you understood everyone's motivations. Team Iron Man versus Team Cap wasn't about good versus evil, it was about 2 different approaches to responsibility. Avengers: Infinity War did something no blockbuster had ever attempted. It made the villain the protagonist. Thanos got more character development than most heroes in their own movies. The Russos understood that for the stakes to feel real, the threat had to feel personal and ideologically coherent. Thanos wasn't evil for evil's sake. He was genuinely trying to save the universe, just in the most horrific way possible. Avengers Endgame was the ultimate payoff machine. Every character moment, every emotional beat, every heroic sacrifice was earned through years of storytelling. Let's pause for a second because I need you to understand the sheer magnitude of what happened next. Avengers Endgame made over $2.8 billion worldwide. That's not just a number, that's more than the GDP of Jamaica. Enough to buy Twitter before Elon did. The population of Chicago paying $20 each to see one movie. But money doesn't capture the real impact. This was a cultural phenomenon. People were taking the day off work for opening night. Theaters were selling tickets for 3 a.m. showings. I Love You 3000 became the new Luke, I Am Your Father. The portal scene, when every hero from the past 22 films shows up to fight Thanos, was the most rewarding moment in blockbuster history. It paid off a decade of storytelling in 3 minutes of pure cinematic euphoria. The Russos had done something that seemed impossible. They stuck the landing on the biggest, most complex story ever told on film. They were on top of the world. They could write their own ticket. direct anything, create their own universe. So what did they do? They tried to prove they didn't need Marvel. And that's where everything went wrong. After Endgame, the Russo brothers founded Agbo, their production company named after their motto. The plan was simple: use their Marvel credibility to create original, director-driven content, build their own cinematic universes, become the next big thing in Hollywood. They had backing from Netflix, Amazon, Apple. Everyone wanted the guys who'd made the biggest movie ever. Their first major project? Cherry, starring Tom Holland as a PTSD-suffering veteran who becomes a bank robber to feed his opioid addiction. Now, this should have been perfect for them, right? Tom Holland was Spider-Man. They'd worked with him before. Serious subject matter would show their dramatic range. It was their chance to prove they were more than just superhero directors. Instead, they made something that felt like 4 different movies fighting each other in a trench coat. Cherry tried to be a war movie, a love story, a dark comedy about addiction, and a stylish heist film all at once. It had weird chapter titles, fourth wall breaks that came out of nowhere, and tonal shifts that gave you whiplash. Critics called it disastrously over-assertive and exhaustingly overlong. Audiences were confused. Tom Holland gave a good performance, but the movie around him felt like it was having an identity crisis. But Cherry was just the warm-up act for their real statement film, The Gray Man. $200 million budget, Ryan Gosling as the lead, Chris Evans as the villain, action scenes around the world. Netflix gave them everything they wanted. The result? A movie with all the flavor of a microwave dinner. Quick, flashy, and instantly forgettable. Think about this. These were the directors who made Chris Evans, wholesome Captain America, into one of cinema's most compelling heroes, but somehow they couldn't make Ryan Gosling, one of the most charismatic actors alive, interesting as a spy. The Gray Man was basically Jason Bourne meets James Bond meets Mission Impossible, but without anything that made those franchises special. It was like someone fed every spy movie into a computer and asked it to spit out the most average possible result. Ryan Gosling played Court Gentry, a CIA operative who, honestly, I can barely remember what his personality was. Stoic? Skilled? That's about it. Chris Evans was Lloyd Hansen, a psychotic CIA contractor whose main character trait was being annoying. Evans was clearly having fun being the bad guy, but fun doesn't equal memorable. The action scenes were technically proficient but emotionally weightless. There's this massive shootout in Prague that destroys half the city and you feel nothing, because you don't care about these characters. Compare that to the airport battle in Captain America: Civil War. That fight had Iron Man facing off against Captain America, friends who'd become enemies over a fundamental disagreement. Every punch landed emotionally because we'd been invested in these characters for years. In The Gray Man, it was just people shooting at each other because the plot says they should. But wait, I need to pause here because I'm missing something crucial. The Russos did have a massive streaming success during this period. It just wasn't as directors. Extraction, starring Chris Hemsworth, became one of Netflix's biggest action hits ever. Over 99 million households watched it in its first month. It spawned a sequel. It proved that audiences were hungry for Russo brothers content. But here's the key. They produced it. They didn't direct it. This is actually the most important clue to understanding their post-Marvel struggle. The Russos are brilliant at system building and talent coordination, classic producer skills. They know how to assemble teams, manage complex logistics, and ensure quality control across massive productions. But creating compelling characters and emotional stakes from scratch? That's a different muscle entirely. Extraction worked because they let director Sam Hargrave, their longtime stunt coordinator, handle the ground-level storytelling while they provided the infrastructure and oversight. They were back in their sweet spot, optimizing a system rather than creating one from nothing. It suggests their real superpower isn't Marvel-specific. It's knowing the difference between being the architect and being the builder, which makes their last project even more baffling. Because if Extraction proved they could succeed by staying in their lane as producers and system builders, their next directorial effort was about to demonstrate what happens when they ignore that lesson. The Electric State wasn't just another mismatched project. It was like watching someone take the wrong lesson from their own success story. This one's particularly tragic because the source material is beautiful. It's based on Simon Stålenhag's illustrated novel. These gorgeous, melancholy paintings of a retro-futuristic American landscape filled with abandoned robots and quiet mysteries. The book is contemplative, atmospheric, almost meditative. It tells its story through images that make you feel nostalgic for a future that never existed. The Russo's adaptation? They turned it into Fast and Furious with robots. Fast cuts, explosions, quippy dialogue, massive action set pieces. Everything that made the source material special. The quiet moments, the subtle emotion, the sense of wonder got buried under the Russo formula. It's like hiring Michael Bay to adapt a haiku, or asking Gordon Ramsay to make a peanut butter sandwich. The ingredients might be good, but you're using the wrong chef. Critics called it visually impressive but emotionally hollow, which was becoming the Russo brothers' post-Marvel signature. Everything that made the source material special, the quiet moments, the subtle emotion, the sense of wonder, got buried under the Russo formula. But before we diagnose what's really going wrong here, we need to talk about something that's been hiding in plain sight. Something that explains why even their most technically proficient work felt somehow smaller than it should. The Russos fell into the streaming trap. When you go see Avengers Endgame in theaters, you're making an event out of it. You buy tickets in advance, you clear your schedule, you turn off your phone for 3 hours. It's an experience. When you watch The Gray Man on Netflix, you're consuming content. Maybe you're checking your phone. Maybe you pause to get a snack. Maybe you don't even finish it. The Russos were making $200 million movies designed for the same environment where people binge-watch reality TV shows. The scale and the medium were fundamentally mismatched. But there's a deeper problem here. The deeper problem isn't about platforms or budgets or marketing. It's about understanding what the Russo brothers actually are. And to understand that, we need to reframe everything we think we know about directorial success. The Russo brothers are world-class conductors, not composers. Give them an orchestra that's already assembled with musicians who know their parts, and they'll deliver a performance that brings the house down. At Marvel, they had characters the audience already loved, a universe with established rules, Kevin Feige as the master producer keeping everything coherent, unlimited resources and the best teams in the business, a decade of storytelling to pay off. They didn't need to make you care about Tony Stark. You already did. They just needed to give you the most satisfying Tony Stark moment possible. Outside Marvel, they had to build emotional investment from scratch, and that's where their formula breaks down. Their style is additive, not foundational. They're brilliant at taking existing emotional stakes and amplifying them to 11. But creating those stakes in the first place, that requires different muscles. And here's the thing that nobody talks about in Hollywood. The Russos aren't alone in discovering that these are, in fact, completely different muscles. The graveyard of cinema is littered with directors who learn this lesson the hard way. Joss Whedon after the Avengers, the Wachowskis after the Matrix. Even George Lucas struggled when he tried to go back to Star Wars after decades away. There's this assumption that if you can direct a successful blockbuster, you can direct anything. But that's like assuming that because someone's a great NFL quarterback, they'd automatically be great at playing baseball. The skills are related, but they're not the same. Managing a $400 million production with hundreds of people and thousands of moving parts requires incredible logistical ability, communication skills, and the capacity to make thousands of creative decisions under pressure. But there's another layer to this puzzle, one that makes their situation even more challenging. When you're the directors of Endgame, everything you make gets compared to Endgame. The Gray Man wasn't a terrible movie. On its own merits, it was a perfectly competent action thriller. But it's not coming from nobodies. It's coming from the guys who made you cry over a fictional billionaire in a metal suit. The Marvel halo effect that elevated their reputation has become a weight around their necks. Every project carried the implicit promise from the directors of Avengers Endgame. And when that project doesn't deliver Endgame-level emotional satisfaction, it feels like a betrayal. It's the same problem that happens when your favorite band releases a new album. You're not just judging it as music, you're comparing it to their greatest hits. And that's a nearly impossible standard to meet. Want to see this expectation problem in its most expensive form? Let me tell you about the project that was supposed to be their masterpiece, and instead became a $300 million question mark: Citadel. This was supposed to be their masterpiece, a global spy series for Amazon Prime that would launch their own universe. The budget? Over $300 million. Making it one of the most expensive TV shows ever made. The result? Critics called it beautiful but hollow. Audiences watched it, shrugged, and moved on. It existed in that weird streaming limbo where shows get renewed not because they're beloved, but because the platform needs content. $300 million for a shrug. That's the Russo brothers post-Marvel in a nutshell. Which brings us to the moment that changed everything. Just when it seemed like the Russo brothers might be destined to become a cautionary tale about the limits of success, Kevin Feige made a move that sent shockwaves through Hollywood. Anthony and Joe Russo would be returning to direct Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars. The Kings were coming home. This wasn't just news, it was a strategic masterstroke for everyone involved. For Marvel, it's an admission that they need their proven closers. The MCU has been struggling with identity issues in the post-Endgame era. Audiences were suffering from superhero fatigue. The box office numbers were down. The cultural conversations were quieter. Who do you call when you need to stick the landing on another impossible, universe-spanning saga? The only directors who've ever done it before.
Yes.
Here's why this comeback makes perfect sense. Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars is literally designed for the Russo brothers' skill set. It's not about creating new characters or building emotional stakes from scratch. It's about paying off existing relationships and delivering spectacular moments that reward longtime fans. It's the ultimate conductor's challenge. Take every major theme from the past 15 years of Marvel movies and bring them together in a symphony that gives people goosebumps. It's the ultimate payoff. The Russos don't need to make you care about the Thunderbolts, the Fantastic Four, or the X-Men. You already do. They just need to give you the most satisfying versions of those characters possible. It's like asking them to direct the Super Bowl of superhero movies. And if there's one thing their track record proves, it's that they know how to deliver when the stakes are highest. But let's be real about what's at stake here. For the Russos, this is their legacy fight. Win, and they become the undisputed champions of cinematic event movies. Lose, and they become known as the directors who peaked early and couldn't recapture the magic. For Marvel, this is about survival. The MCU model depends on audiences believing that the payoffs will be worth the investment. If Doomsday and Secret Wars doesn't land, the entire shared universe concept might be dead in the water. For Hollywood, this is a test case for whether the system player model can work long-term. Can directors who thrive within established frameworks continue to deliver when the framework evolves? And for audiences, this is about trust. We've been burned by disappointing sequels and hollow blockbusters. We need to believe that sometimes the wait is worth it. Which brings us to the bigger picture, because the Russo brothers' journey, from TV comedy to global phenomenon to streaming struggles to homecoming, isn't just their story. It's a perfect case study in how talent, timing, and systems interact in ways that most of us never consider. The Russo brothers' journey teaches us something profound about talent, systems, and success. We live in a culture that celebrates the solo genius, the Steve Jobs, the Elon Musks, the Christopher Nolans, who seem to create magic through pure individual vision. But most success actually happens through collaboration within systems. The Russos aren't worse directors than Christopher Nolan. They're different kinds of directors. Nolan creates the system around his vision. The Russos optimize existing systems to their maximum potential. Neither approach is better. They're just different. But our culture tends to value the lone genius more than the system optimizer, even when the system optimizer might actually deliver better results for the audience. Think about it. Would you rather watch a beautiful, personal Christopher Nolan film or Avengers Endgame? Both are valid answers, but for most people, Endgame delivered a more satisfying emotional experience because it was built on years of shared investment. The Russo story also reveals something important about how modern Hollywood actually works. We're not in the age of auteurs anymore. We're in the age of intellectual property management. The biggest movies are no longer director-driven. They're universe-driven. Kevin Feige is more important to the MCU than any individual director. The Marvel brand is more powerful than any individual personality, and the audience's relationship with characters matters more than their relationship with filmmakers. This isn't necessarily bad, it's just different. The Russos understood this reality and worked within it brilliantly. Their mistake wasn't working within the system. Their mistake was thinking they could replicate the system's results without the system itself. By December 2026, we would see whether the Russo brothers can recapture the magic that made them household names. Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars represent the ultimate test of their thesis, that they are the masters of the Marvel machine, capable of delivering emotional spectacle on an unprecedented scale when given the right ingredients. If they succeed, they'll have pulled off one of the great comeback stories in Hollywood history. They'll have proven that sometimes the best move is to double down on what you do best rather than trying to reinvent yourself. If they fail,
don't you dare.
That's a different story entirely. But here's what I believe. The Russo brothers understand something that a lot of creative people struggle with. They know that there's no shame in being great at one specific thing. Not everyone needs to be Christopher Nolan. Sometimes the world needs people who can take existing greatness and make it even greater. And you know what? When done right, that can be just as powerful and just as important. The Russos built their reputation on sticking the landing when it mattered most. Now they get to do it one more time. And honestly, I can't wait to see if they can pull it off again. Because if they can, it won't just save their careers, it might just save the magic of going to the movies itself. And if you made it this far, hit that like and subscribe button and drop a comment to tell me if you think the Russo brothers will stick the landing one more time with the Avengers, or is lightning just too hard to capture twice? Let's find out together.